Random House Audiobooks presents J is for Judgment by Sue Grafton. Read for you by Judy, Kaye.
J is for Judgment. On the face of it, you wouldn't think there was any connection between the murder of a dead man and the events that changed my perceptions about my life. In truth, the facts about Wendell Jaffe had nothing to do with my family history, but murder is seldom tidy, and no one ever said revelations operate in a straight line. It was my investigation into the dead man's past that triggered the inquiry into my own, and in the end, the two stories became difficult to separate. The hard thing about death is that nothing ever changes. The hard thing about life is that nothing stays the same. It began with a phone call, not to me, but to Mac Voorhees, one of the vice presidents at California Fidelity Insurance, for whom I once worked. My name is Kinsey Millhone. I'm a licensed California private investigator working out of Santa Teresa, which is 95 miles north of Los Angeles. My association with CF Insurance had been terminated the previous December, and I hadn't had much occasion to return to 903 State. For the past 7 months, I'd been leasing office space from the law firm of Kingman and Ives. Lonnie Kingman's practice is largely criminal, but he also enjoys the complexities of trials involving accidental injury or wrongful death. He's been my attorney of record for a number of years, stepping in with legal counsel when the occasion arises. Kingman and Ives occupies the entire upper floor of a small building downtown. The bulk of the day-to-day work is attended to by the two legal secretaries, Ida Ruth and Jill. We also have a receptionist named Allison and a paralegal named Jim Thicket. The space I moved into used to be a conference room. I have my own separate phone line in addition to the 2 lines I share with the firm. I still have my answering machine, but in a pinch, Ida Ruth covers incoming calls for me. For the past hour and a half on that Monday morning in mid-July, I'd sat and made phone calls on a skip trace I was working. When Allison buzzed me on the intercom, I said, "Yes?" "You have a visitor," she said. Mr. Voorhees with California Fidelity Insurance." "Mac Voorhees is out there? You want me to send him back?" "I'll come out," I said. I couldn't believe it. Mac was the man who supervised most of the cases I'd worked for CF. It was his boss, Gordon Titus, who'd fired my sorry ass, and while I'd made my peace with the change in my employment, I could still feel a flush of adrenaline at the thought of the man. I would have checked my reflection. Mac's arrival was already having that effect. But I don't carry a compact, and I already knew what I'd see. Dark hair, hazel eyes, not a smidge of makeup. As usual, I was wearing jeans, my boots, and a turtleneck. I licked my palm and ran a hand across my shaggy head, hoping to smooth down any stick-up parts. The week before, in a fit of exasperation, I'd picked up a pair of nail scissors and whacked all my hair off. The results were just about what you'd expect. I hung a left in the corridor, passing several offices on my way to the front. Mac was standing by Allison's desk out in the reception area. Mac's in his early 60s, tall and scowling, with a flyaway halo of wispy gray hair. In lieu of his usual cigar, he was smoking a cigarette, ash tumbling down the front of his 3-piece suit. He said, "Hello, Kinsey," in a wonderfully wry tone. I was so happy to see him I laughed out loud. "I can't believe you're here. Come on back to my office and we can visit," I said. "You want some coffee?" "No, thanks. I just had some." Mac followed me down the hall, making polite responses as I filled him in on my current circumstances. When we reached my office, we caught up on gossip, exchanging news about mutual friends. Then he told me the reason for his visit. "Something's come up and I thought about you. Remember Wendell Jaffe's disappearance about 5 years back?" "Vaguely," I said. As nearly as I remembered, Jaffe's sailboat had been found, abandoned and adrift, off the coast of Baja. Run it by me again. He's the guy who vanished out at sea, right? "So it appeared. Wendell Jaffe and his partner Carl Eckert put together limited partnerships for real estate deals to develop raw land, build condominiums, office buildings, shopping centers, that kind of thing. The company was called CSL. They were promising investors a 15% return plus the return of their original investment within 4 years before the two partners would take a profit. Of course, they got in way over their heads, taking off big fees, paying huge overhead expenses, rewarding themselves handsomely. When profits failed to materialize, they ended up paying old investors with new investors' money, shifting cash from one shell company to the next, constantly soliciting new business to keep the game afloat. In other words, a Ponzi scheme, I inserted. Right. I think they started with good intentions, but that's how it ended up. Anyway, Wendell began to see that it couldn't go on forever, and that's when he went off the side of that boat. His body never surfaced. He left a suicide note, as I recall, I said. That he did. From all reports, the man was exhibiting all the classic symptoms of depression: low spirits, poor appetite, anxiety, insomnia. He finally goes off on his fishing boat and jumps overboard, leaving a letter to his wife. In it, he says he's borrowed every cent he can, pouring it into what he now realizes is a hopelessly failing business. He owes everybody. He knows he's let everybody down, and he just can't face the circumstances. Meantime, she and his 2 sons were in a hell of a situation. What ages were his kids? I believe the older boy, Michael, was 17, and Brian was about 12. Jesus, what a mess. The scandal left his family reeling and forced some of his investors into bankruptcy. His business partner, Carl Eckert, ended up in jail. It looked like Jaffe jumped just before his house of cards collapsed. The problem was there really wasn't any concrete proof of death. His wife, Dana, petitioned for a court-appointed administrator to manage his assets, or the few he had left. The bank accounts had been stripped and the house was mortgaged to the hilt. She ended up losing that. Oh, I felt sorry for the woman. Since then, we've had 5 years of dead silence. Not a whisper of the man, not a trace. But he wasn't dead, I said, anticipating the punchline. Well, now, I'm getting to that, Max said with a touch of irritation. The question did come up. Insurance company wasn't anxious to pay off without a death certificate, especially after Wendell's partner was charged with fraud and grand theft. For all we knew, he was a skip taken off with the bucks to avoid prosecution. We never said as much, but we were dragging our feet. Dana Jaffe hired a private investigator who initiated a search, but never turned up a shred of evidence, pro or con. Mac went on. Couldn't prove he was dead, but you couldn't prove he wasn't either. A year after the incident, she petitioned the court to have the man declared dead, citing the suicide note and his depressed mental state. Presented affidavits and whatnot, testimony from his partner and various friends. At that point, she notified CF she was filing a claim as his sole beneficiary. We launched our own investigation, which was fairly intense, but there was no way we could prove Wendell Jaffe was alive. We did manage to overcome the presumption of death, temporarily. In light of his financial problems, we argued successfully that it was unlikely, if Jaffe was living, that he'd voluntarily appear. Judge ruled in our favor, but we knew it was only a matter of time before he reversed himself. Mrs. Jaffe was plenty mad, but all she had to do was wait. She kept the premiums on his policy paid and went back into court when the 5 years were up. 2 months ago, she finally got a finding, an order from the Superior Court, and had Wendell declared dead. At that point, the company really had no choice. We paid. Ah, the plot thickens, I said. How much are we talking? $500,000. Not bad, I said, though maybe she deserved it. She sure had to wait long enough to collect. Mac's smile was brief. She should have waited a little longer. I had a call from Dick Mills, another retired CF employee. He claims he spotted Jaffe down in Mexico, a town called Viento Negro. Really? When was this? Yesterday, Max said. Dick was the agent who sold Jaffe the original life insurance policy. Anyway, he was down in Mexico, dinky little place, midway between Cabo and La Paz on the Gulf of California. He says he saw Wendell in the hotel bar having drinks with some woman.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?